Welcome to Able Pathways podcast. I'm Annabelle Ferber, founder of Able Pathways, where we provide executive function coaching for neurodiverse individuals and professional development for educators. Our podcast explores the windy journeys of learning and growth. Each episode, we travel the unique pathways taken by a diverse range of interesting people as they reflect on pivotal moments in their lives that led to unexpected insights and transformation. Through these conversations, we hope to illuminate the infinite pathways for how we grow and learn. Visit our show notes for links, information about our speakers, and resources mentioned on this episode. Well, Lisa, it's so nice to have you here on the podcast today. And I'm very curious about what you are interested in reading or watching or listening to.
I read a lot, especially in the last few years now that I have a little more time. And one of the things I just read was Arundhati Roy's Mother Mary Comes to Me. It's sort of an autobiography of her experiences as an activist writer in India. And I actually don't think I'd ever read any of her work, but this book kept appearing on all these book lists and everything. So I read it, and then I went back and read The God of Small Things, which was her prize-winning book. And it was such a fascinating juxtaposition because some of what's in The God of Small Things is autobiographical, but some isn't. It's just, I usually just read for fun and for plot. I just like to read. But this, you could really see the craft of writing because of what was in her book that was real and what was crafted. And she's just a beautiful writer. So that was a fun reading moment for me.
Do you watch or listen to things or mostly read?
I don't watch. I don't know. I don't watch television and I don't watch movies and stuff. I'm really excited about the Olympics coming up, though. That's the one thing over the years that I've continued to watch. And I'll watch curling. I'm really just a fan of the Olympics, which is so funny because I'm not a competitive person. I never played competitive sports, but I just love the Olympics. I just love watching these young people at the sort of pinnacle of their careers.
Yeah, there's something about it. And it's a different kind of competition too. I could see that. Um, and you see so many displays of
Yeah.
global love
Yes.
and just these beautiful relationships
Yeah.
and they're somewhat ambassadors too to their countries, and that's kind of
Yeah.
beautiful to watch. Yeah.
So I
Um,
like the Olympics, but
yeah.
otherwise I don't watch much. Listening, I also, I mean, sorry, but I don't actually listen to that many podcasts. My sister, all my friends, they're always recommending these different podcasts. I don't know. I don't. If I could listen to a novel, I'd rather do that. But I listen to a lot of classical music.
I just recently got back into Philip Glass. I overdosed on him in college and I was studying music and I just very overdosed on him.
Yeah.
And I took this break and then I heard something and I was like, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. What is it? And it was Philip
Interesting.
Glass. I think it was Gymnopedie 1 or something like
Uh-huh.
that. Anyway, so now I'm very special interest, obsessively playing him and playing it on the piano and
That's
just,
so great.
yeah, no, I'm his number one fan again. It
So funny.
and it's funny you bring up Arundhati Roy because I think no less than 3 other people I've interviewed have mentioned her book
Oh, is that right?
from, completely different, stages of life and fields and all of this, and so
Yeah.
it's so cool to see her go viral in a way,
Yeah.
in this way.
Yeah.
And for your own sort of peace of mind or regulation or however you want to think of it, what do you engage in that brings you some joy or peace?
Music does that for me. There's no question. If I'm feeling really just crazed in the world, I can listen to music. I went this week. I played French horn growing up. I played from 6th grade right through college. And I was a reasonably good musician. I played in the
Yeah.
Philadelphia Youth Orchestra and I played in my college orchestra. But then I stopped and never went back to it. It's just too hard. It's really hard. But on Monday, they were having a master class with a French hornist at Swarthmore College, which is where I worked, and anybody can go. And what they do is they have, a couple, 2 or 3 students play, and then he kind of critiques them and gives them feedback and suggests things to them. And, there must have been about 10 or 12 people in the audience, and I was one of them. And I just, on a whim, decided to go. And it was so much fun listening to this guy talk about techniques for playing the horn. And he was, he used to play in the Philadelphia Orchestra. And so he had stories about people there. And it was just, I just like had this huge grin on my face the whole time.
Yeah.
Really fun.
That's a hard instrument too.
Yeah.
Are you thinking about picking it up?
No, I did start playing piano again this year,
Oh,
though. I
yeah.
haven't played, again in years. I picked it up at one point in my adult years for about a year, and then I just didn't have time. But I've been playing since I think since August now, and I'm really enjoying it. So that's
So fun, right? And there's something too other than like obviously the joy of playing and I loved the joy of playing something I heard that I love and then
yeah.
like playing it over and over again. Each time is different. It's like art in movement, art in time
Mhm,
music in a way
mhm.
that other things might not be. But there's something too about mastery. I don't mean in the sense of like becoming an expert, but just getting better. And last time I played it, I couldn't. And now I got that piece. And
Yeah.
there's something so fulfilling about that.
My teacher and I were laughing because I said to her a couple weeks ago, I said, I'm really enjoying playing scales. She said, if you're going to take lessons with me, you're going to do scales and you start, 2 octaves and you do it slowly and I'm up to 4 octaves and a little faster. And I think it's because I can see the mastery over the course of the week,
Yeah.
I can get it and it feels so good and it sounds like a scale. It's so funny. It's just so limited, but I really like.
It's not limited. Yeah. So I would love to get into what got you into the field of education in general and what sparked that for you?
You know, when I thought about that question, when you suggested it earlier, it's so interesting because I have no idea what sparked it. But from when I was very young, I told people I was going to be a teacher.
Mm,
And this was in the 50s and 60s, and it was I was I grew up in an educated family. My dad was a doctor, my mom was a journalist, and I was really told that I could do anything I wanted to do. I was educated, I was privileged, and there was no question I was going to go to college. And it really did eventually get to the point where my father was not too keen on me becoming a teacher with all the things that I had going for me because I could become anything. In the 1970s, it was really a time when smart white privileged women were supposed to become the doctors and lawyers and CEOs and so forth. But all the way along, I said I was going to be a teacher from elementary school on up. And it's not like I had dolls who I taught or I watched my granddaughter, she teaches the stuffed animals and I never did that. I did always all the early work. I mean, I worked for Head Start as a volunteer when I was in high school and that kind of thing, but I have no idea where it came from.
but it was there from well, then either something sparks you that you don't have a memory of, or you were
Right.
born to be a teacher always. I think that's so delightful because I don't think many people do know from a young age, or they knew something and then it changed. And it sounds to me like you, even though you've shared that you've officially retired, you have not retired from education at all. And
No.
so it continues outside even of the typical career
Mhm.
arc. So you went to college and I'm assuming majored in education? No. Mm.
No, I mean, I went to Swarthmore, there was no major in education, there was
Oh.
at that time, there was one woman who ran a very small program, it was called, in education. Her office it was just her, and her office was in the basement of the main building of the college, but the basement of the main building was this dreary place that really needed to run humidifiers 24/7. It was awful. There were no windows. It was just, and that was what education was at Swarthmore. And I never even thought about that. I mean, again, I was totally mindless about this whole thing. It was just something that was going to happen. In my senior year, I suddenly thought, oh, gee, I guess I ought to think about this. And I found this woman, Alice Broadhead, in the basement of Parish Hall and talked to her a little bit. Um, and I actually didn't find her especially helpful. And then there was I was a history major. Um, and I was talking to a history professor I knew one day, and he said, well, you should look into these MAT programs because they're really for, people who are strong or thoughtful, have done work in their disciplines, but then you can also learn to become a teacher. And so I looked into MAT programs. So it was because of him that I ended up going to a 1-year Master of Arts in Teaching program where I got certified to be a teacher. And then I went and taught.
And what age did you start with, or what subject area?
I trained to do high school, but I started teaching 7th grade, and I taught social studies and English. I was certified in both. And I taught in a K-8 school in Brookline, Massachusetts, and it just led to my love for K-8 schools. I think they're much healthier than elementary school, middle school, high school kind of approaches, but it was
Mhm.
really hard. I almost got fired my first year of teaching. I love telling my past current students and student teachers these stories because it's hard. It's really, really hard to teach. And again, I'd been a good kid. I did well in school, and I went in to teach 7th grade, and they weren't bad kids, but they recognized a rookie from a mile away, and they were giving me a hard time. And I had 3 different supervisors, a social studies supervisor, an English supervisor, and my principal, and they would come in and they would say, well, you really ought to do more full class work because that's when you have the most control. And another would say, but when your kids are working in groups, it really feels like something's happening. It's really good. And another would say, never send kids to the principal's office because that shows them that you can't handle things. And another would say, just get that kid out of your class and send him to the principal's office. So it's just like, go figure it out, honey, basically.
Right.
Um, and so they gave me an ultimatum, and they said, you need to. It was mostly around discipline. And again, the kids weren't bad, but God, my parents never yelled at me. I didn't have a whole lot of experience in managing a class of 30 squirmy 7th graders. By the spring, they were sending other teachers to me to learn about how to be a good teacher. So, and again, I don't think I did anything hugely different along the way, but the kids got used to me. I got better at working with them, pulling them in. And yeah, so I became quite a good teacher, and the district recognized that and made use of me for that. But nobody ever came back and said, gee, we're really sorry we did that to you.
Where did you find that groove with the management side of things, with the instructional side of things?
Yeah. For me, it was around, this is going to sound very jargony, around curriculum and pedagogy. I mean, if you find stuff that engages kids, if you find stuff that really interests them, and then you take interest in them as people and pull them in with you, it works. And so I'll never forget, one of the things I did was read aloud to them because nobody reads aloud to 7th graders. They're too old. And I had a real mix of abilities in my
Mhm.
classes. And so I remember reading a book. I have no idea I've always loved young adult literature, but I have no idea where this one came from either. May just be my brain not being able to remember things. But the book was called, I remember the book. It was called Slake's Limbo. And it was about a homeless kid who lived in the subways and just his story about what happened. And I started reading this book aloud to the kids toward the end of every day.
Mm.
Because we were all exhausted and nobody wanted to do anything anymore at that point. And they loved it, you
Mm.
know?
Mhm.
And then I was teaching stuff about, I don't remember the curriculum, 7th grade social studies curriculum was around the Industrial Revolution. Stuff is meaningless to kids. And I found this movie called With Babies and Banners.
Mm.
And it was a book about the strikes in the 1900s, but it was all done around the women. And it wasn't that the women were the workers, it was they were the mothers and wives but they were the ones who allowed the strike to continue because they brought food to the workers and they took care of the kids and kept everything going. And um, so it was a really kind of so I just, I found materials and I pulled the kids in to things that interested them. And yeah,
Used engagement for
yeah.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
did literature circles with kids and I didn't even know the terms, high interest, low ability, but that's what I for books. But
Mhm,
that's what I was
mhm.
trying to do is find books that really would speak to different kids, and would give them a choice, and I'd say, "This is a harder book, but this is what it's about, and if you wanna read it, I'll help you read it," and they would read it, and, they in these small groups, and then they would have literature conversations about it. I did it by doing what I do, and they just got engaged finally.
The example you just gave actually, I think, is such a good example of implementing growth mindset theory because that's one that often gets misunderstood as really like oversimplified as a praise situation of like praise for effort and you get growth mindset. That's not actually how that works at all on the ground. But your description there of not just piquing interest in a harder book, but also offering the scaffolding a little
Mhm,
bit there too, would encourage the growth mindset of, "Oh, maybe I can stretch a bit in that
mhm.
direction. It's safe to stretch."
Right,
And,
right.
um, and maybe I'll even get some credit for picking the harder book. And like,
Yeah,
yeah, that's just really a beautiful example.
yeah, and
Like,
I didn't have words like growth mindset when I started teaching.
right.
I didn't know anything, and it was well, my MAT program was pretty good. I mean, they gave me good grounding, but I really have I've been doing this now for 50 years, and that's how I learned it. So over time and,
Yeah.
now I know why those things work, but I didn't know.
So you were teaching K through 8. So you went to Swarthmore College, you were teaching K through 8 social studies and English. And where did like just a broad overview, you mentioned 50 years teaching. I'm assuming you didn't stay in K through 8 the whole time, but maybe you did. So I'm just curious what the big arc was there
Right.
for your teaching career.
I taught 7th grade for 3 years and then went to Harvard and got my doctorate in education, and it was an interesting time to be there because they were kind of pulling out of teaching at that time at Harvard. There wasn't that much going on. They weren't training teachers anymore, and then but I managed every semester to do something that involved having me in a school, whether it was supervising student teachers for Brandeis or doing a research project in a school or something like that. So I stayed involved in schools and I got every possible certification for Massachusetts public schools. So I was certified as a supervisor and a principal and an assistant superintendent and superintendent. I got all of them just by managing the courses that I took. It was much easier to get those certifications then than it was now. And my plan had been to go back into public schools as an
Mhm.
administrator. So when I left, I taught again for a year and a half. I finished in January. So I taught for a year and a half. And I started applying for those kinds of jobs, administrative jobs, principalships, assistant principalships, curriculum directors. And, the for me, the classic example of an interview at that time, and this happened, I was being interviewed for a principalship. I think it was either a middle school or a high school, and we were sitting around a table in a conference room, and it was about 12 men and me. So they asked me and so I had made it to the I had made it to the interview stage, so clearly there was something that they saw that seemed valuable. And the 2 questions that I remember were, 1, is there any reason in the next 3 or 4 years that you can imagine you wouldn't be able to be here full time? Which
Oh,
is the
like
only way they could
getting
ask the
pregnant?
question of whether or not I was gonna get pregnant, because they weren't legally allowed to ask it, but they asked it.
Mhm.
And the other question was, there's a lot of senior faculty here, a lot of men, and how are you gonna handle them? And my response to that, I just said, "Screw it, I don't know if I want this job or not." I
Right.
said, "I don't handle people, I work with them." But that was my experience in interviewing for administrative positions over the course of that year. And so at the same time I had been working in the summers at Brown, which is where I got my master's. I'd been working in their summer program. And so I started applying for some university positions as well. Again, not it wasn't my plan to become a university professor. I really envisioned myself in public schools, but I wasn't getting anywhere with that, and I was getting frustrated, and I'd done this teaching at Brown, and I'd done some teaching at the University of New Hampshire as a leave
Mhm.
replacement person for a person who had mentored me, and so I applied to a couple of colleges, and again, I was offered 2 different jobs and ended up taking the one that was not a tenure line. It was a 3-year position at Swarthmore and turned down a tenure track position at Connecticut College because I did not plan to be a professor. So I went to Swarthmore, and 40 years later, I retired from there.
That's incredible. How interesting how, like, those interviews or those, like, moments in time that we have completely move us and shifted us, and I know we started with you saying, "Well, my life hasn't been full of detours at all. I've been a teacher since before I can remember," but that is a pretty big
Yeah.
shift, right, into secondary higher education, and did you so you 40 years at Swarthmore, what were you, teaching, or what was your role over that time?
Yeah. So it was a very small department. It was still a program when I got there. I mean, it's just sort of ironic that, it was in the basement of Parrish with this one woman, and I kind of shook my head and went, "Nah, that's not for me." And then I went back to it. And at that point, there were 3 of us, and our offices were in the building with biology and religion. You could always tell when the biology faculty was doing their experiments with fruit flies with the kids, with the students, the genetics lab with fruit flies, because the fruit flies would come buzzing up into our offices. So what did I do? So it's a fabulous program at Swarthmore in the sense that we both train students to become educators, but we also recognize that education is a field of study that people can do as part of their liberal arts. And what we did was we joined those two. So
Uh,
all the courses offered in the department can be taken by anybody, whether they want to pursue education and a certification to teach, or they want to go into policy, or they're going to be, a parent, or they just are interested, or they think it's going to be a gut course for whatever reason because it's
mhm,
education. All of them take our courses. And so the practice then is informed by theory and research, and the research is informed by the practitioners. And it's just this wonderful
nice.
interplay. It's just
Yeah.
very, very strong program. And so really, I over the 40 years really helped to build that. And it
Mhm,
felt really good. So I taught, and again, because we were very small, everybody had to teach almost everything. So, I taught our foundations course, but over time, the things that I added to the program, that the content that I ended up bringing were around gender and education, because that's what I had to some extent been studying, was issues of gender. I went to Harvard in part to study with Carol Gilligan, even though I only did partly work with her. I don't know if you know her, but um, she's was a really powerful influence on my thinking about women and women's experience in the world in general, but also in education. So anyway, so I taught a course in gender and education that was really important to me, and that informed a lot of my work. And then I got involved in traveling more and doing work, a little bit more work abroad. And so I started teaching a course in comparative education, which was really
mhm,
fun.
mhm.
And then my last sort of new piece was in higher education. So I've taught seminars in higher ed. So, I taught the general stuff in the department, but those were my areas that I really
Okay.
specialized in. I also taught a course in adolescent development, which was like probably one of my favorite courses to teach to college students.
That is so fascinating. Like, oh, yeah. And that's an intersection too, right?
Yeah,
Of the brain development and the sort of theories around psychology and that side of it. It's very integrated, that
right,
space.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Actually, a lot of things you've named have been about really integrating multiple fields and perspectives and studies. Because that's also for gender studies too, would be a
yes,
nexus of
yeah.
sociology and lots of
Right.
other
All
things.
those things, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's partly why I think I was drawn to the field of education in when I went to do my graduate degree. I chose not to do it in history. I chose to do it in education because that's the way I think. To me, the psychology has to be informed by the sociology.
Yeah.
You have to understand structures and status and inequality in that way. And then you have to understand individual thinking in that way. And so that's why it's the way I do think. You've captured that. Yeah.
So you were at Swarthmore and you've taught, and now you've retired. But what are you up to these days?
Yeah, I have kept busy. I One of the things I do that I really enjoy is that I read and interview for Fulbright. People who apply for Fulbright teacher exchanges or research exchanges, I read applications and sometimes I do interviews for them. And one of the reasons I like that is that I just love hearing about what people are thinking about and doing. I was a Fulbright recipient back in
Mm.
1989. I'd only been teaching at Swarthmore for 3 years, 4 years. And got a Fulbright to go to England, and it was again one of those turning moments because it just opened my eyes to how differently people thought about education in other places, even a place as congruent as England
Right.
to the U.S. So anyway, that was really an amazing experience for me. And so I love the opportunity to be able to give it back to people. So anyway, so that's one thing I've been doing is reading and interviewing for Fulbright. And I'm on the board of two journals, editorial boards of two journals. So I'm always reading articles and I like editing. And
Mhm.
again, it keeps me sort of in the loop of what's going on in new scholars' minds in
Yeah.
education because I get to read the stuff that they submit and think about how to make it more accessible or more thoughtful in some ways. So I've enjoyed doing that. And as you know, I've been working with the Taktse International School for over 10 years now. That's the K-12 school in Sikkim. And I've continued that work since I retired. And sometimes that takes away. So I mentor two or three different people there. I meet with them once a week online, and we talk about goals and talk about new ideas and those kinds of things. So some of it's mentoring, and then in the last year, it's been helping to set up this new university that will be it's not exactly a continuation of Tuxie, but it's grown out of from the people.
Same people. Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. It's Lowenstein, who is the head of the school when I visited there, when I got to know the school in 2014, is now spearheading the university. And so for the past year, what I've been doing is helping to develop the program for the first degree. So the first degree in the university will be a master's in educational leadership, which we chose because it had the fewest government regulations. So we could do anything we
That
wanted.
loaded sentence. Fascinating that is the lowest hanging fruit is
Absolutely.
leadership.
But it works for a bunch of reasons. But anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I've been involved in, sort of helping articulate the values of the university and the mission and, get people on board and start and all that stuff. Because of all the people who are involved in this, I'm the only one with any university experience at
Mm.
both. I mean, I part of my time at Swarthmore was spent a few years of it in administration and as department chair. So I
Mhm.
have some.
Mhm.
And anyway, so I've helped with that stuff, but the most fun part of it for me has been designing this program, the Masters in Educational Leadership. So with
Yeah.
two of the teachers there, we sat down and we designed the curriculum, and it was based in part on input we got from teachers at the school at Taktse about, what makes somebody a good educational leader? What do they need to know? What do they need to be able to do? And we took all those things and said, okay, so these are the goals of our program. So how are we going to meet those goals? What kind of courses do we want to offer? Who do we have to offer those courses? But then we also really dug in and, so what are the courses going to look like? And, how many courses? And so we've designed a 2-year program, which has just been so much fun to be able to start from scratch. And at the same time, for me, it's a constant effort, a constant learning experience to be able to match what I know and believe and understand in the field of education to what's appropriate and manageable and accessible and useful to the Sikkimese context.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, that's just that I like that kind of work. And because I'm working very closely with some of the teachers there, I have people who can help me.
What are some of the things you're most proud of, excited about, passionate about that you've built in when you were speaking of the goal? You almost sounded like backwards design. Have you started really with like the goals that
Mhm.
you had, and then we're back to what does that look like, and then got down to the nitty gritties of it. So what? I mean, I know I'm putting you on the spot with this question, but like off the top of your head, what are like those elements that you're just so psyched about for this 2-year program?
Well, my understanding of Indian higher education is that it's very rote, does not involve any reading and writing for the most part, and
Mhm.
that it's a degree granting exercise. And I'm excited at the notion of introducing teachers to learning for its own sake, learning about education. In some ways, as we were talking about before, sort of this really cool interdisciplinary way of thinking about the world, because I don't think that's normative at all in this environment, in this context. And so, you know what? I'm excited about that. I'm hoping it'll be a bit of an eye opener for people without, challenging them to the point where they turn it off. But, I think most of the teachers at Taktse are really thoughtful and caring and interested in what they're doing, and they want to get better at what they're doing. But they don't think about it as a broader endeavor than just getting through the class and helping a kid learn how to do fractions, if that makes sense.
Mhm. 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 If we don't see models for things and we don't have language around things, it can actually be almost impossible to conceive of those
Right.
things. I think what's been so extraordinary to me about the few teachers from Taxi that I've interviewed for this podcast is their life stories include real rebellion,
Mhm.
like extraordinary acts of courage. I
Mm.
think that's how I see it. Well, I did well on the maths, so I got funneled into engineering and then I rebelled.
Mhm.
And that's the story that got them into teaching is an
Mhm.
act of, doing
And to
something.
Toxie in particular, because I think it's a home for people like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really, I think it seems quite natural that out of that would grow this university, and from that university, it's sort of spreading almost a culture of this. Even in Western culture, integrated subject areas. I have a BA in integrative studies,
Mm.
and the master's in essentially an integrated um, thing. And no one in my life has that sort of story. So I
Yeah.
don't think it's like particularly normative here either.
Very
It's
siloed, yeah.
But also I think something that you and I spoke about too is like the field of education is a field where you're signing up to be a lifelong learner, that it
Mm.
isn't, maybe that argument can be made for every field. I'm not
Mm.
in them, so I'm maybe not thinking about those arguments. But in particular, I know as a teacher, you can't just go to teaching college and be done with your learning and get better at what you're
Right.
doing or
Right.
even maintain. So it is
Right.
you are signing up for a lifetime of integrating.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, from my perspective, in order to sort of manage every day, you have to stay open to that, because if you're gonna get up in front of kids,
Yeah.
you have to stay open. I mean, so what I see this again, I experience
Yeah.
this with my own grandkids who live with me. They're 13 and 14, and, um, when you asked about the small joys, before I got off on that riff about music, I was thinking about them, because
Yeah.
one of the things that I like about being retired is that after 3 o'clock, if and when they want to spend time with me, I can spend time with them. And so my granddaughter can say to me, "Grandma, you want to listen to me do karaoke?" And I can say, "Sure." And she puts on a song and she belts it out. And it's such a pleasure to me. I just so enjoy it. But so I think, just to tie that back into what we were talking about, that if as a teacher, you can give yourself the grace and the time over the course of the day to stay open to students in that same
Mhm.
way, then you will be a lifelong learner because every day will be different because the kids are also different.
Yeah,
Um, but I think that takes a certain amount of energy and mind freedom that it is often the case that the systems of education don't allow people to have.
that's
Um,
right.
and
That's right.
so I would love for everybody to go into it as a lifelong learner and have the context that allowed them to do that. I mean, it's one of the things that drew me to Taktse was that that's the context of that school. They do
Yeah.
professional development with teachers twice a week, and it's really engaging and really wants people to be part of the conversation and isn't these one-offs imposing a new reading curriculum on them kind of thing, you know? And so it creates a context where that kind of approach to teaching and learning is possible, but I don't think
Mm.
that's normal.
Is there anything in particular you can think about from your early days of teaching to now, like a philosophy or something that you thought was quite true when you were a younger teacher? Can you think of anything that shifted a lot over your career trajectory?
Well, went into teaching because I wanted to change the world, and it occurred to me that it seemed to me that education was a good place to do that, that we could do it through, um, working with kids to help them understand their agency and their role in the world and where things were screwed up and where things were good, that kind of thing. Um, and I still believe that. I wouldn't still be doing this if I didn't believe that there was some opportunity for education to serve that role in a society. I mean, I'm very grounded in Dewey in that sense. But as you learn sort of the structural impediments to making those changes, you go through some questioning about whether or not it's possible. And I have to say, I'm using sort of the broad you. I don't think I ever got to the point where I questioned the possibility. I certainly became much more aware of the barriers and much more thoughtful about how to help other people go into a field that's so depressing, and feels so compromised right now. So that was one thing. The other thing I would say, and this is smaller in some ways, I think when I started doing work that involved training teachers, I really believed and this came out of my own guilt of leaving the public school classrooms, I think. But I really believed that you should stay in teaching. If you're going to put the energy into learning how to be a teacher and go through your first few years of it being so hard, and that's where you really do a lot of additional learning, that you should stay in it. That too many people left teaching because other jobs were more lucrative or more rewarding in both personal and professional ways. And so I think I had a very strong moral principle about that I've given up on because I really do believe that working in the field of education in any capacity, but including as a teacher at any point in your life can be both rewarding and an important thing to do because it gives you a good perspective on what's going on in the world. So I no longer expect the students who I trained as teachers to stay in teaching or to stay in education, but I'm absolutely fine with that in a way that I hadn't been in my
Mhm.
earlier years.
I That really resonates because I had my own mantra of like fight the system from the inside. And I hit my wall year 8, year 9 of not like giving up that wasn't true.
Mhm.
Um, but that I also cared about my own mental health and I also cared about what kind of life I wanted to live. I was wondering if you wanted to speak more on that tension between like the academic and then the practical implementation that
Mm.
you've also been on the front rows to as well. And so anything you want to speak to there of the tension between those two spaces?
Oh, there's so many
Yeah.
pieces, so many aspects to that I can think of. I so the example that I've given my students, when I said I went to graduate school for all those years and paid all that money and I'm no better a teacher than I was before. I came back and I was teaching 8th grade my first year back, and then I did high school, and I was teaching Romeo and Juliet, and I gave them I gave the class this assignment. They just had read Act 2 of Romeo and Juliet, so the Romeo and Juliet secretly married. And so I said,
Okay.
um, "So what are you gonna do next?" I said, "Put yourself in their shoes. What are you gonna do next?" And they only had to write a paragraph, and they wrote these paragraphs. And I have a very clear memory of sitting in my living room and, and s reading these paragraphs and separating them into 2 piles. And I wasn't sure exactly what the piles were yet, but they were clearly in 2 piles. And then I read through them, and I realized that they were very gendered, these piles, and it really what they were showing was the way in which they understand the world and the relationships within it. So one pile of students was saying, "I would run away with Juliet and change my name and not contact my family unless they agreed, to just accept it all, and otherwise I would never be in touch with them again." And the other pile said, "Well, I would go to my parents and I would say, Romeo really loves me and I love him. And it's silly to let this feud get in the way of our love. And I really want to, stay connected to you, but I just, this is the person I love and I want this to all work out. You know, those are two very different ways of understanding the world. I had read psychological theory that explained that to me. And so I didn't change the assignment and I didn't change the way, I read them or graded them, but it made me understand who my students were, um, and how they were thinking about the world. And then I could modify assignments if I chose to address that. And
Mhm.
what I actually took that back into the class to these eighth graders and said, "Look at this. Look at what's going on here. What do you think's going on here?" So um, that's an example of how that was an aha moment for me of how my own academic work was going to inform practice. And so I tried to hold on to that moment and appreciate it and think about how what I knew would impact. So that for me was an example of that. The other place I would run into this is when I did research. So research is really interesting. I think it is useful in its own way, but it ends up being very siloed from practice, right? And so we know in the field of education what to do to make things better, according to the research. But either it doesn't get translated into practice or practitioners don't know about it, or it's not really accurate in terms of what really happens in classrooms or educational spaces. And so those two things aren't talking to each other. And at the same time, as an employee in an academic institution that requires research in order for me to stay there and continue to do my work, I have to do research. And so my struggles along the way were how to do research that both meets the requirements of the academy and that feels to me like it matters and translates into anything of use to anybody. And so for me, that was a personal struggle that I took with me into every research project.
Mm. You've mentioned that you are reading and interviewing for Fulbright, you're editing journals, you're designing and implementing a master's of education, leadership, and mentoring. Does not sound like retirement at all, by the way. Of all the things you're engaged in, what brings you the most joy and feels the most energizing? And that could also maybe include your parenting, grandparenting too.
Yeah, yeah. Depends on the day. I'm also mentoring some teachers locally, and that's fun. What brings me the most joy? I've really enjoyed putting this program together. I mean, what I was going to be when I grew up, once I got into the field of education, was a curriculum designer. I wanted to be the assistant superintendent for curriculum in a big district so I could design curriculum.
Mm. Mhm.
So I've really enjoyed that. That's been fun. Um, but truly, I mean, it's hard because the kids are teenagers now. But um, my true joy in life is from them, I think, at this stage. When we laugh together or or at this stage when they give me a hug, I'm just so thrilled. But, my grandson Colton plays cello, and when I see him in an orchestra performance, my heart bursts. I mean, it just makes me cry. That is just blessing. That is just pure joy. Um, so
Yeah.
I think sort of the, uh the professional work is fulfilling in some ways, but I've done so much of it over the years, and I feel pretty confident in my abilities there. And so it's not the same kind of joy that you get from a good relationship, and love. So right now,
Yeah.
I would say that those are truly my best moments.
Yeah. If you look forward in time over the next 5 years or so, I like to ask people what's your vision? Where are you or hopes
Mhm.
because we don't have any control over things, but where are
Yeah.
your your hopes and dreams and aspirations for yourself, your career, or in general, this field of education? Where would you like to see that in 5 years?
Oh, just out from under the thumb of Trump for now, but,
God, I
uh
wish she was the only terrible person.
yeah, right? I mean, it just the whole structure right now feels unbelievably oppressive. I just want kids to be able to feel like they can come to school and not get arrested on the way home.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just once Trump got elected and the despair, I think, began to set in, trying to connect to more like-minded people, and one of the things I kept hearing over and over again was, "Keep working at the grassroots level." Keep those fires burning or at least smoldering, because at some point when there is more space and less fear, that those things will be in place and we'll be able to continue to grow them. And while I'm not sure I completely agree that that's the best or certainly not the only way of rebelling or moving forward, it's been the only thing that I can latch onto. Um, and so, for me, trying to find the grassroots places where people are doing good work and I can be supportive of that, is what I'm doing. So I work with the kids' schools and I work with other schools and I work with a couple nonprofits and those kinds of things that help me feel like 5 years from now, I will have continued to contribute in some way to better things rather than giving up, which
Giving defeat, yeah,
yeah.
which is a and it makes sense too of this stuff is very big. This it's big in the sense of hundreds of years of a system that has really supported more of this than it has
Mhm,
like, progressiveness has always been a uphill battle, right?
mhm.
Um,
Yep.
and freedom has every little tiny millimeter of it has been fought tooth and nail. And so that's, I think, really good advice too, just for one's own mental health. When it feels so big, the antidote to defeat is what's that one small thing I can do and stay engaged and not give in to.
Mhm.
I think it's very good
Yeah.
advice. Thinking about someone who might be tuning in today who's interested in teaching or has resonated with parts of your story, what advice would you give them about this field? Or, yeah, from your wealth of experience, what are some things that you would want them to hear?
That's a good question. One of the reasons that many of us go into teaching is to make a difference and to change the world. And the easiest thing to do is to go into your classroom and shut the door. And it's because that's where you have the power
Hmm.
control, and it's sometimes the best way to protect yourself from all those outside circumstances. My advice to people would be, sure, go ahead and do that, but find your people. I think you've got to surround yourself with people who get it and who are working with you and can pat you on the back and help you when you cry, and can it's just better when you're working with other people, even if it's outside of your building or, outside of your institution. I just think the that we need those kinds of communities, and that the field of education isn't always really good at creating those. That first of all, there's no time in the school day, and schools have so many demands on them and so on. So you have to create your own. So that would be my first piece of advice to people in the field of education, either going into it or currently in it, is that you got to find people who will help you do what you want to do well. And, take care of yourself.
That's great advice. It
Yeah.
can be such an isolating experience, and there's competition, and again, the structure and the system, like you said, doesn't lend itself as well to real authentic community where you
Right.
can feel safe to make mistakes and really
Mhm.
be critical but kind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And to find ways to be rebellious, Sometimes it's really hard to do that in your own context, and you have to find other places to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, in our show notes, I love promoting folks, organizations who are doing good work out in the world and to spread that. Who should we be including?
I work with a nonprofit called Need Indeed in the city of Philadelphia. I'm gonna
Mm,
put the link in the chat for you. And
thanks.
it's this wonderful small organization. I'm on the board, but I do a lot of other work with them too. Um, it's an organization that works with teachers in grades, mostly grades 3 through 8, and it does professional development with the teachers so that the teachers can engage students in community-based social justice work. Mm. And it's just sort of this gem. It's got, it understands what teachers need. So it provides training for them, but also each teacher has like a mentor or program manager who will go in with them. They help them match to community partners. They support the kids. It's just this fabulous program. And it's at a moment in its life, where the staff is great and the board is very supportive of the staff, so it's just in a very healthy
Oh,
place
good.
right now.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also very small, and it's all on soft money, and so, yeah,
Let's promote them. This looks incredible.
they're great. They're great. So that's where I'd put my money right now.
Okay. I'm going to include Taktse. I'm going to
Yes,
include
yes, please do.
that's
KBU.
just NKBU, Kangchenjunga Buddhist University. Thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Yeah, what fun.
It was great chatting with you
Okay.
and learned a lot. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, I invite you to share this episode and subscribe to Able Pathways podcast on your favorite platform. Your support helps us to share these meaningful conversations with more people. Have thoughts about this episode or suggestions for future guests? We would love to hear from you. Leave us a comment or email us at hello@ablepathways.com. Until next time, I'm Annabelle, reminding you that there are infinite pathways to growth. May you travel yours with curiosity and courage.